And on Championship Sunday, how many of you know that you've got to stay plugged in the entire until the game's over? And so the power of connection is a series that we're in, and one of the interesting things is that much of what has been talked about this morning is what God has actually placed on my heart. And I didn't share it with him. I did not share it even as our Brother Horace prayed. I did not share it with him. And what's interesting is that the mystery of time, it's interesting to me because it is a mystery. Time is a mystery. And when I look at that, it is one of the mysteries of the universe. And the amazing thing about time is that nobody can fully define it, but somehow we've been able to measure it, and as a result of it, we live our lives according to time. Now, it's interesting that what we also have is we have daylight saving. We have daylight savings time, and so what happens is that we move time up and we move time back, kind of like the expression that we can control time. But how many of you know that time cannot be controlled? I mean, it can't be stockpiled. It can't be stored up. Time cannot be put as leftovers in the refrigerator. And because if we could store it up, what would happen is that so many of us would literally have closets full of time, waiting at the right moment to pull it out and use it. And so one of the interesting things that I think that we can do here is that there are two things I want to share with you this morning, and two things I want to share with you at this time this morning. And the first thing that is really about time, that because we do understand that we can't store time up, that there are two things that are absolutely certain. And the first thing that I want to share with you that's absolutely certain is that you can be certain that the seasons will come. Look at this, Genesis 8:22. Champions, I want you to read that with me like you know it is the word of his power. Let's read it together now. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. And so if you keep living, that you're going to see winter. If you keep living, you're going to see spring. If you keep living, you're going to see summer, and then you're going to see fall. And so what we understand then, that time keeps moving, and seasons, we can be certain about it, that the seasons will come. Now, the second thing that I want to share with you about time is that what time does is it presents change to us. Time presents change to us. And I want you to read in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 12, verse 1. Solomon writes in a very powerful way. And I'm going to ask you to read it like you know it is the what? Word of his power. Let's read it together now. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years draw near, when you say that I have no pleasure in. Isn't it interesting that Solomon is talking to us about the transitioning of age, and how that there are certain things you don't think about when you're young, but then now you could start considering those things when you get older. And if you continue to live, that the things you did not consider when you were younger, you're going to have to start considering the same things your mother and your father considered. Now, I was looking at that and I was thinking about it, and I just kind of come to the realization that I can tell that I'm getting older now. Now, I try to stay, I do the best that I can to stay fresh. I try to do the best that I can to keep everything in place. And I try to do the best that I can, but I know the truth. And the truth is that I am getting older. And it's not because somebody told me, but time informed me. You see, I know that I'm getting older because I used to jump out of bed in the mornings. And now I get out of bed. I know that I'm getting older because I can go into a room and then I start figuring out, did I come in here to bring something or did I come in here to pick something up. See, I know that I am getting older because I used to brush my teeth. Now I have to care for my teeth. I used to comb my hair. Why are you laughing? Y'all laughing at me, but I know we got some Miss Clairol and Just for Men up in here. Okay, let me say it like this. I know we got some box dye and some root spray up. Look, what I'm trying to say to you is time brings about change. Time brings about change. If you agree, say, uh-huh. And so what's interesting, but that there is one thing that time has never changed. And that is that oftentimes when God wants to do something significant, he wants to break through, that what he does is he connects it to an appointed time and a divine relationship. And I was thinking about that because Gwen and I we were in college together, and although we were in college together, we had a class together. We didn't really say anything to one another during the entire time we were in college together. Now, she would see me, according to Gwen, she would see me walk across the campus, and she would sit there and she'd say, "That's a good-looking man." And so we finally got to take a class together, and Gwen was like studious, and so she sat in the front of the class. And so I figured out that what I'm going to do is, this is one of the classes I would get to early. And I would sit kind of in the middle so when Gwen passed by, I could smell her fragrance. Gwen is like Hadassah. She can work out and still smell good. But it's amazing that we never said anything to each other the time we were in college and throughout that entire class. And so I moved to Texas, and Gwen is living in Louisiana. And so a weekend, Gwen decides to come to Texas. And it is that night, one night, I decide to go to a place that I'd never been to before. And lo and behold, Gwen walks in to a place that she had never been before. And that night, we spoke for the first time. And that was 40 years ago. And you know what that was like, because that was a very special night, because that night, as Gwen and I talked, I wanted to take her out to dinner. But it was late. So we went to Big Kip's. Anybody know what Big Kip's is? We went to Big Kip's, and so Gwen ordered some chicken wings, and she ordered those chicken wings, and she was sitting up there at the table. I'm eating, I'm knocking them out, and she's sitting up at the table like this. I said, "Gwen," I said, "are you going to eat yours?" She said, "I'm full." So one of the things that we recognize here is that some people would call that, 4 years later, we finally saw each other and we made the connection. Now, some people will call that coincidence, but we know that it was a divine connection. And it was not too early. It was not too late. It was the exact time that God intended it. Now, what I want to share with you this morning is that in John chapter 5, I want you to turn there, please. And as you go to John chapter 5, I want to show you something, because there are some breakthroughs that are not at an appointed time, but they are a mindset. They are at an appointed time, but there is a mindset. And the mindset can cause you to miss that time. And so in the book of John chapter 5, we're going to take a look at it, and we're going to read the story here about a man that was at the pool of Bethesda. And what's interesting is that Jesus shows up on the scene, and when Jesus show up on the scene, he sees many people with different conditions. And I want you to see this, please. And let's read in verse 3 and 4. Let's read that together now. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time in the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first, and the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had. Now, John is speaking of their physical condition, but he's really also speaking of a spiritual condition. Because notice this, he says that there were some that were blind, there were some that were lame, and some that were paralyzed. And that there were some that was blind, that they could not see, they were unable to see what God was doing. Then he said that there were some that were lame, they could move, but they were unstable whenever they moved. But then there were some that were paralyzed, and they could not move at all. And he's giving us a spiritual condition of a people that are there at the pool of Bethesda. People that are just sit and they won't know what God is doing. They can't see it. There's a move of God coming around and they still can't see it. There are people that will move, but they're unstable. They are walking, but there's a wavering that's taking place in their walk. And then there's a people that can't move at all. And there is a spiritual condition that's here. And what's interesting to me is when we look at that, it is by the pool of Bethesda. And Bethesda means house of mercy. These people are at a house of mercy, but they still are dealing with their condition. And what we recognize here is that it is the pool of Bethesda. And this pool represents a religious system where people are waiting for the right time, they're waiting for the right conditions, and they're waiting for the right person to help them with their breakthrough. You know what it's like? It's like if I could just get to that conference. If I could just, when I wait and we get to that revival that we're going to have. If I could just have somebody pray for me. It's all of these conditions where people are waiting, but they don't recognize that the miracle is right around them. And so what's interesting is that there's a move of God taking place, but there are people that can't see it. There are people that are unstable when they're moving, and there are people that cannot even jump into the river when the move comes. And so notice this. It says in verse 5. Let's read it together now. Now a certain man there who had an infirmity 38 years, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be?" Now, what's interesting is this is a prophetic parallel of Israel wandering in the wilderness. And I want to show you this because Jesus it's a powerful move as John talks about it at this particular time, because Israel had traveled from Egypt to a place called Kadesh Barnea, and it is at the border of Canaan. You remember that the Bible says that God did not take them. Now, Moses says that it should take about 11 days to get there. But the Bible says that God did not take them the shortest route, because if they went the shortest route, they would see war and they would change their minds and go back to Egypt. And so although he had delivered them from Egypt, that they still had a mindset that they need to be delivered from. And so he didn't take them the shortest route. So he took them down. It took them 2 years to get to Kadesh Barnea. But notice this. That was the point that Moses sent them out. Now, they're at the border of Canaan. They're at the border of their promise. Moses sends them out to go and spy the land of Canaan. And then they came back with a report 10 of them that said that, look, we can't do that. God had already told them, go and possess the promised land. They now went out and scouted it on their own, and they said, we can't do it. We can't do what God said. We can't move the way God says we can move. We are grasshoppers in our own eyesight, and they made a decision that they would disobey God. But look at this. I'm telling you, look at this. In Deuteronomy chapter 2, it was 2 years that it took them to get to Kadesh Barnea. But look at Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 14. Let's read it together now. 38 years passed from the time we left Kadesh Barnea until we crossed the Zered Valley. By then, that entire generation of fighting men had perished from the camp. Look, they had traveled from Egypt, and 2 years, they're right at the border. And 38 years later, they're in the same place. And John chapter 5 is giving us a picture of this journey, which is all of our journeys. Notice this. They had wandered for 38 years before entering the promised land. And the Bible tells us it was 40 years. And it was 40 years because they took 2 years on purpose to get to Kadesh Barnea. But that was the moment that they disobeyed God. And when they disobeyed God, 38 years wandering in the wilderness. And God said in the book of Numbers, he said that I'm going to give you a year for every day that you disobey. And that's the 40 years. Now, look at this. I believe that this particular story is an interesting story because for 38 years, this man had been sitting here. For 38 years, they were moving around, and they were right at the point of their promised land. And so this man, he represents a generation that's stuck in transition. They're unable to move into their destiny. They are on the edge of their breakthrough. They're at the gate of their promise. And what it represents is somebody that are at the point of their miracle. But they're waiting. They're disappointed. But they're still waiting. They're discouraged. But they're still waiting. But in their mind, the reason they're waiting is that it's not the time. The reason they're waiting is that because it's a religious mindset that says that I'm waiting on a move of God, but they didn't recognize that God was waiting on them to move. So can you imagine this? 38 years, how many seasons of stirred water this man watched? Can you imagine how many people he saw get delivered? How many people that he saw get their breakthrough, but he was in the same place. And when Jesus steps into this picture, Jesus asks a question, and he steps in not just as the healer, but he steps into the picture to challenge their mindset. And when he asked this man, do you want to be made well? How many of you know that's an easy yes? Do you want to be made well? Oh, yes! I want to be made well. Jesus, make me well. But rather than answer affirmatively with a yes, he started making excuses. And so instead of faith, the man gave an excuse. And you know what it's like. I don't know how. God instructs you, tells you an assignment, gives you a calling, gives you a purpose, and what do we say? I don't know how. I don't have the money. I don't have the time. Somebody's always going before me. And you know what excuses are? Let me just say this. You just get it in your spirit. Excuses are the enemy of movement. Look at this in verse 8. Let's read this together now. Jesus said to him, rise, take up your bed, and walk. And immediately the man made well, took up his bed. Now, this is what's interesting is Jesus gives a three-step prophetic breakthrough. Number one, he says, rise up. And this word, rise, it doesn't mean that you just stand up. No. This word, it means that you get yourself to another level. It means that there is a shift from your condition to your future position. And you know what's interesting is that the greatest battle and sometimes is not in your condition, but it's in your conviction. And so when Jesus tells this man to rise, he says, rise. I just think about Isaiah. Arise, shine, for the light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. Isn't it interesting? It's because sometimes you can be so low that the glory can shine on over top of you, but it never touches you. I think about, you're in a place and you're sitting down, and the light. See, whenever we go to a restaurant and Gwen likes to sit outside, I like to sit in the shade rather than the sun. She likes the sun rather than the shade. Why? It's because I got enough sun. And when she sits in the sun, what happens is that we get more closely aligned. But I've got enough sun. And so I like to sit in the shade but enjoy the outdoors. She likes to sit in the sun with the shade. But notice this, is that the sun could be up here, but you could be down here. And what do you have to do? You have to rise. Rise up. And then now it's the foundation that was talked about earlier. And that on that foundation that you begin to stand. And when you stand on that foundation, the glory of the Lord now shines upon you. And so Jesus tells him, he says, rise. And then he says, this is the second step, take up your bed. Oh, I love that one. Because when he told him to take up his bed in this particular passage of John chapter 5, it was prophetic instruction. That this man had to shift from his identity to his authority. You think about it. This man was identified by his condition. He was identified by his limitation. This man was identified by his disability. And Jesus spoke and he was saying, pick up your bed. In other words, don't leave your testimony behind. Don't leave it behind. Take it with you. Because what used to hold him, now he's holding. What used to control him, now he is controlling. And he's no longer a victim now. He is a witness. And Jesus says, don't leave your testimony behind. Isn't it interesting that when God delivers us from something, doesn't he want us to take it with us? He wants us to take it with us, and then he wants us to share it with others. And so he's saying that look back what I've delivered you from. Look where I've spoken to you, and that you may have been in the ashes, but I've raised you up. You may have been sad, but I've given you joy. And he's saying, don't leave your testimony behind. So rise up. Take your bed. You know what I sense in a very real way today, that there's a shifting that's taken place in the atmosphere from early this morning. And let me just say this to you, that you are not your past. You are not your pain. And you are not your struggles. Would you just declare this with me? I declare. I have authority over what had authority over me. Oh my God, there's a shifting in the atmosphere. Shifting in the atmosphere. So Jesus says, rise, take up your bed. And then he says what? He says walk. Now, see, this is interesting because this wasn't just a movement, but it was about momentum. And so this prophetic a word that God spoke, this man had been waiting on, and he had been waiting for years for his breakthrough, for his miracle. But notice this, when Jesus says get up and walk, that what he had been waiting on was no longer necessary. He no longer needs the angel to come down and stir up the water. See, he no longer needed someone to help him in the pool. See, because he didn't need anyone to carry him. Why? Because he was being carried by his word. And what was paralyzed now starts moving. And what was waiting now is walking. And I'm just telling you that I sense in a very real way. And I'm going to ask our team to come because, Melvin, would you come? And what I want to do is that there is a song that's in my heart and in my spirit. Atmosphere is shifting. The atmosphere is shifting. And we got to get that in our spirit, that there has been a shift in the atmosphere. And so, look, this man had been waiting on someone else to help him. He was waiting on the perfect conditions. He was waiting on a move of God, but he did not realize the move of God was standing right in front of him. The atmosphere had shifted, and he did not recognize it. And I sense in a real way that some of you have been waiting for the right moment.